Hello and welcome to No Wrong Choices, a podcast about the adventures of life that explores the career journeys of successful and interesting people. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by the other fellas Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. If you enjoy our show, please support us by clicking follow on your podcasting platform and by giving us a 5-star rating. You can also learn more about us and connect by visiting our website at NoWrongChoices.com or look for us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and now YouTube by searching for No Wrong Choices. We're always eager to hear feedback about recent episodes and to meet new people, including potential guests. This episode is part 2 of our conversation with Grammy Award-winning mix engineer Ariel Borujow, focusing upon how he built his career after breaking through. Larry Shea, as Ariel's friend and former colleague, you are once again the perfect person to lead us into this.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that anybody who hasn't listened to episode 1 of Ariel's story, go back and listen, because I think he really talks about his humble beginnings, really, his willingness to do anything, and he really tells that story in a very thoughtful way. So I encourage you to go back and listen to part 1. And as far as where we're about to go on his journey, he's a professional, right? He's becoming a pro. He knows his craft at this point, and he's honing it and becoming a great artist, because that's essentially what a recording engineer is a great artist. You're literally taking a musician's vision and you're bringing it to life, and it takes a special person to do that. It takes another artist to make another artist's vision come to life, because you got to be savvy, you got to be quick, you got to be smart, you got to have great ears, we talked about. But Ariel also has this thing about him, you just want to work with him, and he just makes you feel better about everything you're putting together. And I think that's what he's about to tell us about, is how he became that professional.
I think part 1 of what we heard was, here's a guy who learned confidence, or he was able to kind of gain confidence in every job he did, every place he worked. He was able to learn just a little bit more. The more artists he worked with, the more confidence he grew professionally, the more people listened to his opinion. And then obviously he was able to give his opinion more and more. And then, yes, we go from Ariel Borujow, the technical wizard, to Ariel Borujow, the artist.
Yeah, and he's living out my dream. This is what I wanted to do for a living, guys. I wanted to be a recording engineer, and there's, it's grueling. It's long hours. It's tireless. It's sometimes very thankless, but there's a certain reward that comes with setting up a microphone and having someone sing into it or play an instrument into it and putting those pieces together. And then a year later, you're in the supermarket and that song comes on and you're like, man, I saw that thing from the beginning to the end. And there's a real reward there that Ariel gets to carry out daily. So how amazing is that? So he's living my dream. I'm super proud of him, and I can't wait to dig into this part of his tale.
Well, that sounds great, and I'm going to go a little bit simpler. I can't wait to hear the craziest things he's seen in the studio. I want to hear some of the highlights in terms of some of the great sessions he's been in. So with that, here is Ariel Borujow. We rejoin the conversation with Ariel discussing the importance of being good with people and a good listener.
When I was at Puffy's, I was working with some of the top engineers in the game. And at the time, that's why I sent a resume there, was because I heard those records, the Notorious B.I.G. and all those. And I was like, man, these things sound great. Like, I want to learn from them. And I remember one time, one of my mentors there who I was assisting, he said to me, don't worry about what I'm doing on the console. Watch how I interact with the client. That's more important. And that was like a big thing, where now the kids that are coming up now are all working from home. And I've seen it happen where their ego gets in the way. Like, who is this guy to tell me my mix ain't good? Like, but that's not what it's about. Like, your mix could be great, but did you capture the feeling that the artist intended? Because maybe it shouldn't sound so good, maybe that's not what they're looking for. So part of the job is being I call myself a sonic psychiatrist,
Oh, great term. Oh my God.
That it's really trying to fit. That's the hard part, is figuring out. And sometimes you figure it out and sometimes you don't, but there's conversations. And I feel like between Puffy and the cutting room, once those two came into play, I was able to get my confidence. And after the cutting room, the last real gig I had as an assistant was RPM, and RPM was a legendary studio. That's where Billy Joel and what's his name, Phil Ramone did all those early Billy Joel records. And it was on 12th between University and 5th in this building on the top floor. This guy was there since like the late 70s. And I think he was paying peanuts there. And it was like, I mean, Harrison Ford lived like 3 floors down, and this guy had the penthouse. It was sick, the studio. It looked real retro and whatever. But I was there for quite a bit. With this other guy, another engineer named Nick Hard, who's we're still really, really good friends. And he's Snarky Puppy's engineer. So he's like, won a few Grammys and doing well, talented guy. And we were there together, and I ended up getting canned from there after 9/11 because there was 1 room, 2 assistants, and the work wasn't coming in, and Nick was there before me. So I got fired. And after that, I said, I'm never going back into a studio, and I'm going to go freelance now, meaning I didn't want to work for another facility. And I went freelance. And at the time, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, we were living, we moved from Brooklyn in August of 2001. Luckily, because I lived in, I don't even know why I lived there, but we had an apartment on the Brooklyn Promenade. It was a studio apartment.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Well, her sister went to Brooklyn Law and got it through that and kind of like grandfathered us in. And at the time,
I remember that place. Beautiful view of Manhattan. Really
you were
nice.
there, Larry?
I was there. I went to that apartment once, I think, Ariel. I don't know what context, but I remember that apartment.
You came to my was it my 4th of July party? I don't remember.
Yeah, maybe. I remember the place was banging, man. I loved it.
But it was like it was a studio apartment. It wasn't big, but what made it feel big was the bay window facing like every
view. Oh my God.
I mean, it was ridiculous. It was insane.
Yeah.
Literally the Twin Towers were there. So luckily I didn't see that. But we moved to Astoria, and after that, I remember telling my wife, I said, man, whatever view we get here is going to suck. And I don't know if you guys watched, was it Friends, where they had the view of ugly, fat, naked guy or something?
Yeah. Yes.
Well,
yes.
that's what we had in Astoria.
Nice.
Literally facing a brick wall with 1 window there, and it was like this like hoarder guy, like, oh, it's horrible. But so from that point on, I remember she was going to Hunter College, and her father was, she was going to get a computer for her birthday. And I said, hey, maybe we can get it so we can both use it. And I could get a Pro Tools M-Box and start running sessions. And I built it up to add all this RAM and stuff, because the Dell computers, you could modify them. And that's what I did. I got a M-Box. And I started running $15 an hour sessions out of my apartment. And
with who? Like, well, who were your clients?
Rappers, man.
Yep.
My first client was an artist named Kel Spencer, who was actually, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term ghostwriter. But a ghostwriter is essentially somebody that writes, gets paid, but isn't really like the face of the song. They're just like, they get their publishing, but they're not, nobody knows they wrote it.
Right. Okay.
Sort of like the writer of Donald Trump's Art of the Deal.
Exactly. Basically. Oh God, let's not talk about that guy.
All right.
So it ended up being Will Smith's ghostwriter, and he started booking sessions to do like drop like what do they call it, like demo songs for Will. And from that, it turned into him working on his artist stuff, and then word of mouth. And my business was always built on word of mouth. It was always like, it was always just someone telling someone else. And then the next thing you know, they would show up at my house and I'd do sessions. And then my wife would come home from her 9 to 5 and cook dinner. And if a client was there, she'd cook dinner for them and they'd eat dinner. And, it started getting to this thing where I started realizing people were booking sessions closer to dinner time because they wanted a free meal.
Oh, look at that.
And whatever, it worked. And I was there for a little while. And then after that, we moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria so I can use a secondary bedroom as a studio. And I built that out and I started charging $25 an hour. And I started getting more sessions, and people would show up. And sometimes I had like really good artists coming in, you know, like Master Ace and all these people that I had no idea would show up at my house. And I was there for a while. And then one day I was looking on Craigslist and I found this this ad that was like, built studio with a booth, $600 a month. And I remember I was like, I can't afford that right now, you know? So I remember my wife comes home and she pushed me into it. She goes, listen, it's first and last months. It's $1,200. That's the worst thing that can happen. So if I were you, I would say, try it. Worst case, you lose $1,200. You say you tried it and you move on, you know, but something tells me you're not going to fail. So I did it and I didn't fail. And I built up this one. It was in a 50-room rehearsal space in Astoria, Queens. And the funny thing is the guy who owned it is still one of my good friends, Tommy. And later on, years later, he helped me build my studio in my house because he understood what it was to build a studio because he built it. So I had this studio for a few years. And at the time, I got my first Grammy nomination for a mix I did. And instead of going after the A-level artists like most egotistical people would, being like, oh, I got a Grammy nom, now I'm going to make millions of dollars.
Who was your Grammy nomination with?
It was for T.I.
Okay. Oh, wow. T.I. at that point.
And,
my gosh.
Yeah. And I ended up, two of my friends at the time had like a small PR company. And I said, do me a favor. I want you to like put a blast out, an email blast to independent artists saying that now you too can get mixed by a Grammy nominated, you know, multi-platinum engineer.
Smart.
And I did. And the work started coming in and I wasn't charging that much. So yeah, I could have gone. I tried a manager and she got me 1 gig in a month and it was decent money, but you know, let's say it was like $65 an hour and I worked like 8 hours. Or I can charge, you know, anywhere between $350 to $500 a mix at the time, working out of the comfort of my, you know, my own place. And I was getting like, you know, 4 or 5 mixes a week. Who's doing better, right? And at that time,
I guess your prices have gone up now, right?
I mean, they have, sure. but they have. But the difference with me is I was the last breed of engineers that came from the analog days. So a lot of the engineers, when everything moved over to digital, the prices were coming down because people had their own studios at the time.
Right.
So my prices never got up to like the crazy $6,000-$7,000 a song that they did. It was much lower than what they were used to, but I was like, wow, for me, I was like, shit, I won the lottery here, you know? And they were complaining that they weren't getting enough and people were undercutting them. But really, the overhead was much lower, you know? You didn't have to book a studio and you didn't have to, you know, you had to pay studio time and then an engineer fee back in the day. That wasn't the case. I kept it all and just paid $600 a month to my rent every month, you know? And that, to me, like once I had that studio, that changed. So I was there for a little while, and then I remember someone sent me another ad on Craigslist. Craigslist was awesome back in the day. And I remember
it actually was useful at some point, right?
Very useful. And I mean, it was basically like social media for jobs and all this other stuff. So someone sent me an ad that said, new, you know, high-end recording facility opening up in Manhattan, looking for an engineer, mix engineer with credentials. I said, cool. What's going to hurt? So I ended up sending them in a resume, and I had an interview, and I went in, and it was in Harlem on 125th and Park, and it was the old studio of Ornette Coleman, the famed saxophone player that was on Atlantic years ago in the 60s and 70s, or maybe even.
I remember that place too. Yep, great studio.
It was called Harmelodic was the name of it.
That's
right.
I
met this guy there, and we worked out a deal where he's like, I can rebuild the second room for you. And at the time, let me go back a little bit. Tommy, I outgrew my small room in Astoria, and Tommy said, I'll build you a new room here. What do you want? I said, I need an office, because at the time my wife was like, I'll quit my job and manage you full time, because I was double booking people, and I'm not much of a, I know how to sell myself. I don't have the art of the deal figured out like Trump, or maybe I do actually. Maybe I can.
You probably have it down much better.
Much better than Trump, for sure. So my wife decided to come work with me. So I said, listen, I need an office. I need a little lounge, a booth, and a control room. And he goes, okay, I'll do it for X amount. And if it's going to help you, Tommy is like one of the best human beings on the planet, right? Like I adore him. And I mean, what he did for me was great. And so at the time I told this other guy in Manhattan, like, look, I'm about to build this facility, and this is how much the guy wants to charge. And he goes, I'll match it. Come here, and, your wife can come, and I'll give her a space here. And we ended up taking the deal. I remember almost having a heart attack, because telling Tommy, I felt like I was I never screwed anyone over in my entire life. And maybe that's why, the tortoise always wins, right? The turtle always wins, not the tortoise, the turtle. And I've always felt like the turtle, slow and steady, and, slowly rising up. And I felt terrible. I remember telling Tommy, he had just started to knock walls down for me. And I was like, man, I'm so scared to tell you this, but this is what's happening. And he was like, listen, you'd be an idiot not to take a Park Avenue address. Do it. It'll help your career. So I did. And it was a studio called Stadium Red Studios.
Look at you.
And we got there. At first, it was just basically like me paying rent. She was working, booking my sessions. And then he saw what she was doing, what I was doing. And it ended up becoming sort of a partnership where he was like, you don't have to pay me rent. Let's work this out a different way. And I ended up bringing different friends from the music industry, accomplished guys. And we ended up becoming from a 2-room facility and ended up becoming a 5-room facility.
Wow.
In a few years. And we became like probably the most popular studio at the time in Manhattan. Everybody was coming up there. Like, you would be we had a kitchen, brand new kitchen, and there was a shower and all of that. And I remember, like, you go into the kitchen and you don't know who you're going to run into. And the next thing you know, you're, talking about working a session with this artist. And we had my mastering engineer was there, and it was a beautiful, beautiful time. And then the owner had made some terrible decisions, and the facility closed down after a few years, and I was left in the dust again, so I had to pick up the pieces, and I ended up partnering with a guy in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, who had a nice facility that I needed something nice to bring some of my better clients to. But at that time, my friend Tyler, who's an accomplished jazz engineer, he's also the backup music mixer at SNL, and he had like this small private mix room in a warehouse of 10 studios in Greenpoint. He goes, listen, I need someone to split the rent with. Rent was nothing. It was like something like $800 a month. It was $400.
Oh, wow. My God. Come on.
So it was nothing. So my wife was like, just take that other room. Even if you use it once a week, it doesn't matter, So at that point, my career changed, and I'll tell you how. Remote mixing. This was 2013. And what happened was that the owner of the guy I partnered with at Greenpoint, I was basically giving him a cut of my mix fee. So I was making a lot less money. And I started realizing my clients didn't need to be there. So my wife and I had this idea that was like, okay. And it was really her experience managing. I mean, she was like the Dr. Larry Shea of the Stadium Red. And she,
probably way smarter, way more talented though. I mean,
she's definitely not, she's not a music person, but she's very intellectual. I don't know why she's with me. I'm the opposite, I think, with the other side. And she could think of numbers and things like very quickly. So I remember she said, well, what if we did this, right? let's take like 10 clients. They each book like 2-3 days apart from each other. And we say, okay, you don't want to pay $1,000. Let's pull round numbers, $1,000 for an independent mix, right? She's like, what if we charge them $750 and you tell them it's a 7 to 10 day turnaround for the song, right? Now you have 10 clients who are getting a reduced rate, not showing up. You can work on it whenever you want, and you can send them the mix when it's done. And they feel like they're getting the best of you and you're getting what you want. And I was like, brilliant. So I started realizing that my clients were taking that deal more than showing up at the studio, because once they show up to the studio, I have to raise that rate up because I got to give a cut to the partner, and you're also booking me for a certain amount of hours, right? So that was pre-pandemic. And so what I started realizing was I was using Skype, and I tried to figure out, like, Skype I can screen share. How do I get them involved to do the changes, right? So there's always changes in mixes. Oh, we want to raise the kick. We want to raise the vocal. And I said, okay, I got to figure out a way to make them involved rather than like sending them an MP3, then sending me an email with the changes, then sending it back like, oh, instead of
right. How do you speed up the process? Obviously, right.
It was completely just I don't want to waste anyone's time. You know, creativity, it comes and goes.
Yeah,
you know?
Time is money too. Absolutely.
100%. So I figured out that Skype had screen sharing, and somebody turned me on to this program called Nicecast. That was a company called Rogue Amoeba, and they had a program called Nicecast. Nicecast was a third-party plugin that you can stream, and I think they were using it for podcasts early on. But I was able to stream from my DAW directly to the client through a link, and they could look at my screen and see what I did and listen. But it was really janky at the time. But it worked, right? It really worked. So sometimes the video wouldn't, cooperate. So I would tell them, look, let's just get on a call and you stream and tell me, great, that sounds good. Vocal, turn up the snare a dB, go up another dB, perfect. And like the changes would take 15, 20 minutes. And I'm like, this is great. So I decided to leave the other studio because I felt like I wasn't really recording anymore. I was starting to really transition off of recording, and I loved recording because people were booking me for me. That was the thing that we talked about earlier. My confidence was there. And let me tell you something. What I learned is that I control the room. Nobody controls the room. It's my room. You're in my office. You're in my home. And I'm going to make it so comfortable that you don't even know what's going on except for what's in your head and your focus and your creativity, right? So I started just getting bored with recording, and I was doing a lot of hip hop. And after a while, some of the hip hop, this is where I feel old, I just wasn't really jiving with it,
Sure.
And mixing became my thing. It was my passion, and that's where I ultimately wanted to go, was become a mix engineer. And once I got into that room, Tyler was barely there. Tyler has 3 kids. He's married. He's working at SNL, and he's mixing jazz records. The only time Tyler was there after his kids went to bed. And I became like an early bird. I would get to the studio by 10 a.m. and I'd be home. 2018, fast forward, 2015, my son was born. And I wanted to be there every single day for Noah. I wanted to be there when he went to sleep. I wanted to be around when he was awake. I had to be there. I was around too many engineers that were always in the studio rats. And, Larry, you talk about, you couldn't be in the studio you can't imagine the hours you wanted to leave at a certain time.
It's too much. 20 hours at a time. It's too much.
I got to that.
Ariel,
point.
how old were you by that point?
I mean,
like 40?
No, Noah was born. I was 38,
30s?
I think, when he was born.
Yeah.
38,
so,
39.
So you've gotten older, obviously. As you've gotten older, your priorities change, obviously.
100%. There's no question. But I think early on, I saw how miserable some of these engineers were. like their wives, I've heard everything from like their wives cheating on them to divorce to this to that. They're not in their kids' lives. And my dad worked like 2-3 jobs, so like there was early on, I only saw my dad on Sundays at times, like it was really hard. And I didn't want that, and I was only having one kid. I'm one and done. So we waited a long time to have to have children. So it was always career. So what happened was in 2015, when Noah was born, I left the studio. He went to bed every day. This kid was early on, he went to bed at 7:30 and woke up at 7:30. This kid slept 12 hours, man. My father-in-law always said to me, you don't know what it's like to have a real child. You're lucky. So I used to go home and make sure I put him to bed every night, or gave him the bottle in the morning. Like I needed that. And then once a week, I would always take time to give my wife a break, and I would take him for the day, and we do things around the city as a baby, and I didn't know. I'm like, hey, look, there's dinosaurs, and he's a baby. What the hell does he know? He can't even see colors.
It was also for you. When was the last time you went to see a dinosaur?
Oh, that was elementary school until then. Now I've been to the Museum of Natural History like at least 30 times already with this.
I was there with my 4-year-old on Sunday.
Amazing. Oh, 4 years old. I feel for you. 3s and 4s are worse than 2s, that's for sure. But my priorities changed. So in 2016, 17, Tommy and I went out for drinks. We're going back to Tommy in Astoria, and he says, man, you're doing well. Why don't you buy a place and build a place in your house, and then you don't have any overhead? And I said, man, I don't think I'm ready to move to the suburbs yet. At this point, I've been in the city since I was 18. I've already spent longer time in the city than I did in the suburbs growing up. So at this point, I'm a city slicker. So I said, well, I don't know, man. He goes, trust me, man. You work all the time. Like, what do you do in the city anyway these days? You got your family, let them breathe fresh air. I'm like, okay, cool. So I started looking. And I ended up moving, man. I moved. Really important for me was my son having grandparents around, because I had one set of grandparents here and I didn't have both. And my in-laws are retired and travel between the two coasts, and my parents are here. So it took a lot of, my ego had to get checked for a minute. And I didn't want to move back to where I grew up. But I also know that, like, I grew up in a very amazing school district, which that became the priority. And I wanted him around my parents. So I ended up moving literally around the corner from my parents. Not where I grew up, but, I ended up buying a townhouse because I'm not a yard work guy. Like I'm not going to spend the weekends mowing the lawn. And,
you are suburban adjacent.
Yeah, I can't do it, man. Like if I'm going to take weekends off, I'm going to spend it with my family. And I did. I bought a townhouse, and there was a corner unit. So I knew that Tommy said, find a corner unit, because then you only have neighbors on one side. And we built this floated studio, and took about 6 months. He's a gem, man. He lives out in Greenport, Long Island, and he would come back and forth, and he had one of the best restaurants, and somehow he managed to come and help me build it, and we built it together. He's like, I'm going to turn you into a man. You're going to build something. I said, okay, great. And I gained the confidence, and we built a studio, and I've been working remotely. Now I have Zoom. There's a program now that I can stream high quality audio, so they're hearing it in, full 24-bit quality, with like literally less than maybe a second of lag time. Life is good. There's no question that, I love working from home. I wake up every morning with my kid at 7:15. I make him breakfast. I have breakfast with him. We connect. I get to see him when he comes home from school, and we play some video games and, his homework, and I get to have dinner with my family, and I get to go to my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes every night, which is, my passion too, so it's
You have to wear a thong?
No, don't laugh. That's funny. No, man, we wear a gi. Come on. No, that's hysterical.
Why are you talking this way? The guy's gonna kick your ass. What?
No, man, it's.
That's what I figure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has to be.
I started doing jiu-jitsu years ago, probably around 2009 or 10. And I couldn't be consistent because at the time we were running Stadium Red. We got to Stadium Red in 2008. And, classes were at 11 a.m. But the problem was that, if I'm leaving the studio at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and I got to go sleep and be back at like noon, I'm not going to jiu-jitsu class. So it would, I broke it up a lot. And then I've always done martial arts since I was a kid. Jiu-jitsu for me became a passion because it's not what people think. It's not like this brute sport. It's very science-based. It's, a smaller guy has leverage over a guy 100 pounds heavier than him. And it's like mixing records, mixing records. You're taking the pieces of the puzzle and it's small changes to a song that create the bigger picture, right? It's like very increment steps, and jiu-jitsu's the same way. If someone's on, trying to take control of you, it's like the small minor details of like the different, body motions and stuff that help create the leverage. And it's helped me with my mixing. It's helped me. I mean, for 46, I'm in great shape. And I attribute that to that. Big shout out to my jiu-jitsu school. Dan D'Elia and, my Henzo Gracie family over there. But it's great. And I get to do what I want to do. And, listen, do I feel like I've peaked yet in my career? No, I haven't peaked. But I don't look at it like that. The fact that I do this every day, I feel blessed to do it. And, most people aren't in my position in the sense that they get to spend time with their family. And I could care less about, being with my, being in a studio, for hours at a time with clients. I love what I do, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm moving on to the next. Now the whole Dolby Atmos spatial audio thing, I've been training. One of my friends is the senior vice president of A&R at Republic Records, and they bought out Red Bull Studios, and they built this crazy facility on 18th Street. And he's been kind enough to let me go in and train with his engineers on spatial audio. And I'm going to be putting up spatial audio in my room within the next few months. And it is, listen, obviously we haven't talked about the downsides of the business and the times that I wanted to quit and all of that, but it's real. It's definitely a very hard business. We didn't touch upon the negative, which I didn't want to, just because, we want to obviously show that it's positive, and it is, the majority is positive, but they do say that the entertainment business is the hardest business to be in because really it's everyone, most people are out for themselves, and, I've just been lucky enough to have people around me that I don't have any enemies. I've never had enemies, and if I feel like someone's battling me, I just move away because there's no reason to engage, There's plenty of music in the world. There's plenty of money out there. Now I think with streaming, there's more artists to work with. And I enjoy the ride. I enjoy the process. This is what I've always wanted to do. And I've always dreamt of having a studio in my house,
Let's, that's living the dream right there. You have the best of all worlds, right? So let's do some quick hitters. So quick answers here. Ready? Mm-hmm. I've seen a million things in the studio business being a studio manager. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen happen at a studio? Because these guys are making their art, and they need all sorts of, obviously there's a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, right? It's a lot
that's
of
the
sex,
easy, that's the nothing,
right?
I mean,
the sex stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
I've definitely walked in on celebrities having sex. I've definitely seen, guns get hidden and shootouts in front of studios.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And being a white.
I'm sorry, shootouts in the studio?
No, in the front.
Outside.
Of course, that's expensive equipment.
Yeah. I mean, being a white boy from the suburbs, you don't see that, I was definitely privileged to grow up where I grew up and not see any of that. But I've seen that kind of stuff. I've seen fights happen where like planned fights where they fight in a live room for money. I mean, I've
seen it all. You've seen it all, right? I mean, it all happens.
I've seen things happen at the cutting room, Larry Shea, that you don't.
Yes,
really know.
Listen, I very
those
quickly.
Didn't make the log? That stuff didn't make the log, huh?
No, they did make the log. They're in the log. I mean, no names, of course, but yeah, I mean, people would pull guns and say, "I'm taking these tapes home." So I'd get a call at 3 a.m, and they'd be like, "Can so and so take their tapes home?" And I'm like, "No, under no circumstances are they to take their tapes home." And they're like, "There's a gun to my head," and I'm like, "Literally or figuratively?" And they're like, "Literally."
You tell them Dr. Larry Shea says you are not taking that tape home.
Listen, I heard one story where this is an old story, and I won't name the engineer, but he told me a story that he was doing a Tupac session at Unique Studios, and Pac walks in with like an entourage of like 50 people, and they put 2 guns on the speakers facing the engineer, just laid him at there.
Wow.
I mean, things like that. I've had to help hide guns. I mean, there's definitely been like a lot of crazy stories that,
What is one of the if one or two or three, what are some of the greatest sessions you've ever been in?
So
they don't necessarily have to be famous people. Like
I agree. I was going to answer that. So one of the ones that I really, there's 3. There's the Black Eyed Peas. Gave me the confidence to work with A-list artists. And that week was, I mean, aside from making at the time the most money, I still remember how much I made that week, Larry Shea. I think I made
probably more than me.
$4,000 that week.
$4,000. It's probably more than I made that week.
Yeah. So I mean, at the time I was like 22, 23. I was like, God damn, man, we're balling. So, then there was an artist named Phase One that I used to work with, who was a very good friend of mine. And we had a collective of producers, and they were really into like very conscious hip hop, like very much like Jay Dilla and like that type of artistry. That this is when I had my studio in my first commercial studio in Queens, Tommy's first place. And every Friday we would do sessions, and it was like a hangout, and I thoroughly enjoyed, and I deeply missed those sessions. The producer passed away a few years ago, Asa Buchanan, big shout out to him. I really miss those days tremendously because it was a family. We would go out to eat after the sessions. It was great. And then the other one is I work with this very accomplished Celtic rock band in France called the Celtic Social Club. And in 2018, I've been mixing their records for 10 years. And they flew me out to France. They wanted me to produce their album. And I get to France, and it's the studio in the southwest coast in a town called Rochefort. And I flew into Paris. I took a 3-hour train ride on my own, not speaking a lick of French except for merci and s'il vous plaît. And then I went to this. It was a gorgeous studio. We had our own chef. I mean, the history of the studio was an old theater. It was unbelievable. And I remember my clock was so off that week. I went there for 15 days. And I remember waking up in the morning before anyone, walking around that city. Nobody spoke English. I get a croissant, like just sat by the sea. I ate oysters like every freaking night. The one thing, if you look on my Instagram, there's a picture on there where I took of like a plate of oysters with a beautiful bottle of wine right in front of the console. And I got interviewed by French TV. It was French national TV. I was actually on like one of the biggest TV stations there. And a few years before that wasn't a session, but in 2015, the producer of the band, who's also the drummer, he's a very, very, one of my closest friends on the planet, Manu Mascow. He ended up getting me to do a 5-city masterclass in Northwest France.
Oh, wow.
And when I tell you guys that I thought I was walking into a classroom of 5 people, I did one, just to give you perspective. I did one in Cognac, the city of Cognac, like right outside the Remy Martin and the Hennessy factories, and Martell factory. And there was about 200 people there, and it was in an old castle. And I was on this huge stage and with an interpreter, and it was one of the most unbelievable experience. It was easy to bring my wife out there because I'm like, yeah, my manager's going to come, and don't worry about paying another room for her. She'll just sleep in my room, So we ended up going out there, and it was hard. I got a taste of touring life because we'd have to get in the car in the morning, go to another city. It sucked. I'm so glad I didn't choose to be a musician. And it was great, man. It was the best experience. I was in every newspaper in every city, with the big article on me as this, American producer, engineer. And then I got a private tour of the Martell factory, Cognac, which is like the oldest cognac in the entire world. And I think they thought I was Bono, man, because they pretty much felt like they gave me the key to the city. I'm not even kidding you. Like, when I tell you I got like a really big tour, they must have thought I was somebody I'm not. I mean, the head of cultural affairs of the region of Cognac came and met with me and took pictures with me like I'm some sort of...
You're a Grammy winner.
You won Grammys, for God's sakes.
Listen, you know what I learned about especially the French. They really appreciate American engineers and producers. They treat you differently. And I've always had great experiences working with them. I do an album every year with them, with this band. So I ended up, that 5-city masterclass. And then I got to spend 2 days with this artist who's this very accomplished band called Red Cardell that's been around for years. They've been produced by Clive Martin, who did like Queen and shit like that. They're like I don't know, I guess it's like Celtic rock. And I got to spend some time. I have a good relationship with the lead singer, and he invited us to stay at his house, and I ate this ridiculous food and, got to hang out by the sea and got to see where Johnny Depp's vacation home is in that area that nobody knows about, and just beautiful experience. So I think those experiences really stick with me. And I know there's more, but like those are the ones that really to this day are very close to my heart that I think about a lot.
That's very, very cool. Well, the last question that we'll throw at you, if you were talking to a young person today who wanted to get into your world, what advice would you give them?
That's a loaded question.
Or an older person.
No. Listen, because, sometimes you sound like that, the older you get, I don't want to sound like the get off my lawn guy,
Well, that's what Two Share's here for. That's his job.
Yeah, I usually go that route.
So, I guess the best advice I would give to somebody is the music business is a long road and it's a journey. It's not, people see I think the hardest thing is to see people on Instagram now, because or whatever social media they use, but I'll take Instagram because the only thing you see on Instagram is the good. Nobody ever posts the bad. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Can you imagine someone put a picture like, here's my face when the client says my mix sucked? Nobody puts that up there.
Yeah.
So they always see the good and the good of what's going on, but they don't realize that the grass is always greener. And taking it from a guy like me, this business is waves. So what I say the best advice I give to people is live like you're poor, right?
Interesting.
So let's say that I do a project and the album, let's say it's a $50,000 all-in project with a point, right? Do you think I'm spending $50,000 like that? I'm putting that money away. I cut myself a check. That's the same check, whether I'm making 50,000 or 2,000, It's the same check coming from my to myself. And that's the way you have to live. So I tell people, like, it's really about, it's not how much you make, it's how much you spend. Right. And in this business, that's one part of it. The other thing is relationships, right? I mean, look at Larry and I, like, we've known each other for so long. And the minute we got on the phone, we haven't spoken in years. The last time I think I went to one of his birthday parties at a bar, right. And we get right into it. And it's like nothing's ever changed. And that's from having good relationships, like Larry and I definitely have had some, like, not conflicts where we hated each other, but like in the music business, like, as your boss and the worker, there's not always going to be a walk in the park.
Yeah, the usual stuff. Yeah, the
usual stuff. But relationships are everything. Keep relationships, because you don't know what that person that you're talking to, who that person's going to be 10 years down the road. I've seen people destroy relationships with people under them, where a few years later they're vice president of A&R of a major label, and then all of a sudden,
don't burn those bridges. Definitely
never
don't
burn
those bridges.
Yeah,
it's really important.
And really, it's about honing your craft. And I know that's like very cliche to say, but it's really important to understand that there's so much information out there now. It's all about becoming the best at what you can, create your own style. You could learn from different engineers, but ultimately everybody's ear is different, and I always equate it back to jiu-jitsu. Every body, your body is different than the next person's body. So how you maneuver certain positions or certain mixes or certain techniques is very individualized. So it's about being your own person. And eventually you get to a point where anybody can make anyone sound good, but people start coming to you for taste. And that's what you want to strive for, is you want people to come to you for your taste because of what you accomplished. And again, it's a long journey, so don't ever give up. That's very cliche, but it's the truth, because I've wanted to give up so many times after the cutting room, after Puffy's, after this. Things happen in life that are tragic, that you never know. You lose friends, deaths and all this other stuff, and you start questioning what you do. But at the end of the day, it's nothing can compete with the passion. And if you have a passion for this, you just have to continue, because ultimately the turtle does win, right? Like, it gets to the finish line. And that's what matters. And at the end of the day, your health is also dependent on your stress level. And, I don't have to answer to anybody anymore, except my wife. But, but otherwise, that's,
all great advice without any question at all.
I know. And I feel like some of it is cliche, but it's now that I'm older and I understand that.
No, it's valuable though. It's valuable.
It is. And it's the truth.
It's cliche because it's true. That's the point.
Yes. 100%. And that's really the advice I'd give someone. And smile, and make people feel comfortable. That's it.
So if anybody wants to find Ariel after this conversation, where should they seek you out, and what should they know about engaging with you?
I'm always engaging with people. I feel like no matter what, I love engaging with people. I love to give advice. I also do mentorship. People call it mixing lessons. I call it mentorship lessons. I've done that I have some really good engineers out there that are becoming very successful, who assisted for me, have taken my one-on-one mentorship lessons.
Where could they find that, Ariel? On your website?
So on the website, so if you go to my website, which is www.Ariel, Ariel, BORUJOW.com. My website is, I check it. Instagram is really the one that I get the most hits on. And my Instagram is mixed by Ariel, MIXEDBYARIEL.
Awesome. So if anybody out there wants to engage with a highly skilled and talented engineer, those are the ways to track down Ariel. Ariel, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
And it's my pleasure. I had such a blast. I love doing this kind of stuff.
Thanks, buddy.
So that concludes our conversation with Ariel Borujow, and what a great guy! What an interesting conversation that was. You know, to me, who's a huge music fan, getting a look behind the curtain is incredibly fascinating. And beyond that, Ariel is such a great story about somebody who was entirely self-made, put themselves out there, took a big risk and made it. So just a very inspiring person. Tushar, what are your thoughts?
Part one of our conversation with Ariel was all about a guy who was willing to do almost anything and everything to get his career off the ground. And the thing I take away from part two is, here is a man now who's very comfortable with his life. He's very comfortable with his family life. He wanted to do everything he could to make sure that, he had time with his wife, with his son, with his career, and have it all balanced very well. And that's kind of what he's done. And it sounds so wonderful. Like, in many ways, part two of our talk with Ariel, I came off as it just came off as sweet to me. It just came off very sweet and very endearing. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm very happy we had a chance to speak to Ariel Borujow. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, I think he paints a picture of somebody who worked so hard in the beginning so that he could basically have the freedom to have a family life, right? And to be a part of his children's life and to work on his terms almost. And I think the partnership with his wife was instrumental with that. I mean, he just gave us so many great, he called them cliche parting lines, but I think they're important. Relationships are everything. And that goes for any profession we're talking about. Never burn bridges, create your own style. Ultimately, when you're talking about being a mix engineer, they are, hiring you for a reason. They want your stamp on their song. And so when he talks about honing your craft and creating your own style, you're selling Ariel Borujow. That's what it is, and ultimately the turtle will win. I love that.
That was a great line.
Because slow and steady wins the race, man. And he just laid it right out there for you. And that works for a lot of professions, not just being a mix engineer.
Absolutely. And, one of the core tenets of our show is to try to shine a light on things that our audience can use within their own careers and with their own journeys. And one of the things that stood out to me, and granted, it's not necessarily easy to pull this off, but Tushar, I think you alluded to the partner earlier on. And, if you look at many successful business people, many successful people in this world, they have made the right decision of a life partner. It's funny. Warren Buffett often says the greatest advice I can give anybody is to marry the right person. It changes everything. And it's really
absolutely.
Like, if you read any book about Warren Buffett, he seems to go back to that all the time. And when I hear Ariel talk about the confidence that his wife gave him, pushing him to set up his own business, take certain risks, be willing to walk away from her own career to start to run his business, all that just really stood out to me, and is just great proof that concept and that idea certainly holds true.
Yeah, and I also think it's important that we talk about Ariel, he wasn't chasing a paycheck here, right? This could be, as I said, a very grueling business, but it can also be very rewarding. And it's not necessarily the paycheck. Yeah, you can make a living, but you're a part of something magical, making music. And I think you hear that in Ariel when he tells his story, right? That he wanted to be part of something like, oh my God, they pay somebody to play with those buttons? Like, that's going to be me, And there is something very magical about it. And when you get in the music business, you see your name on an album for the first time. There's no words that can explain. So it's a viable career. It's a great career. It's changed dramatically over the last couple of decades, but go after it, man. Dream big, because that's what this show is all about, is dreaming big.
That's exactly right. So Ariel is great proof of that. He set up his own business, his own practice. He created a career and a life on his own terms, and that's pretty remarkable. So that is our conversation with Ariel Borujow. Ariel, thank you so much for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, please tell your friends, click follow on your podcasting platform, and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if this episode or others inspired you to think of someone interesting in your life who could be a great guest on the show, please send us a note via the contact form on NoWrongChoices.com. On behalf of Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea, I'm Larry Samuels. Thank you again for joining us, and remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success. We learn from every experience.